Hey there, welcome to episode 44 of the Quaggling Sand audio program. I am your host, Dan Hugo. Today is an anniversary that nobody wanted to have, I suppose. This, the 23rd year, hence the title, since the attacks on the World Trade Center and the Pentagon and a field in Pennsylvania, 9/11, 2001. Those of us who were around for that time, I think there's still more people that were around than not, but that's changing every year. It's an interesting time to reflect upon, to look back and recall. Many things have changed since then. Some things have not. Hopefully, wherever you found this audio program, you are able to find the episode description in which there are some show notes. I have a few interesting links to go along with today's anniversary special of sorts. I have not really had any opportunity or outlet, I suppose, along the 23 years to present some ideas. There's not going to be a lot of, this is not like a controversy or conspiracy theory episode. I will touch on a couple of those things. I found it interesting to watch, especially, now we can look back through the lens of the pandemic years, arguably 2020 to 2022, or maybe even up until today. Looking through that lens back at September 11th and the years that followed that, it's somewhat interesting. I think it's been educational. We should always be learning, and this is certainly an interesting topic for exactly that. Before I commence the usual reading of the summary from the show notes and a link rundown, I will remind you, or perhaps for a first-time listener, tell you that quaggling sand, what could that possibly be, is a term I coined in my very early years, very early, probably 3-4 years old, for something that you probably know better as pins and needles. Quaggling sand. It's when circulation returns to a limb, usually. A limb, maybe you sat on your foot or you were laying on your arm. It's numb, and then the feeling returns, and it's quite a sensation. It puts me in the mind of recalling things, the return of circulation to a thinking process, perhaps. But anyway, this is just a recollection of the in situ and then the years that followed. So let's begin with the summary, very brief. Some 23 years ago, a wildly impactful event took place that we all probably remember if we were around back then. At this point, anyone listening would say, oh, of course, today's September 11th, but you may not be listening on September 11th, so stay tuned. The links for today's episode, fairly common first two: shameless self-promotion, buymeacoffee.com/Dan Hugo. That's DANHUGO, in case you are new. And Ko-fi, ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/Dan Hugo. Shameless self-promotion. You don't need to spend any money. You can if you want to, but not required. No compelling, there may be compelling, but no compulsory spending of money. The Buy Me a Coffee site is a reasonable place that is familiar to many people as I know what Buy Me a Coffee is. And similar with Ko-fi, I think maybe not quite as common. I don't know if I would say popular. Both of these sites can be found with links in various open source projects and other such things. So it fits into my general pattern of pursuit of the content creation notions. So check out buymeacoffee.com. I do have links to all of my creative works, the 4 audio programs I produce each week, 4 different programs, and some other things, GitHub repositories and so on. I have a list of my favorite coffee beans in case you're curious. Yes, my projects are powered by coffee. Any proceeds that do arrive through either of these channels do go towards coffee. Could be beans, could be devices and equipment along those lines. But either way, shameless self-promotion complete. No obligation to spend money, like I said. I have a link to the 9/11 Memorial and Museum, 911memorial.org. Check that out if you want, and especially if you weren't there. I personally have never been to the museum or the newly constructed, is it building WTC 1? Honestly, I don't know the name of the building. In my visits to New York, Manhattan, since 9/11, 2001, I had been there a few times when I was working with Intel, so I would visit Manhattan or the general area, but the building was still under construction or generally not a destination just yet. So this was what, 2014, 15 timeframe. It may have been completing. It may have been sort of ready, but I do, because it's something I probably would have visited. I did visit some museums and whatnot when I was in town. Throwbacks to my younger years when I'm from New Jersey. So Natural Science Museum of Natural Science, MoMA, etc. But no, I never did visit the actual site. Such is life. The 9/11 Commission Report, if you've never read it, you may want to. I was actually skimming through there. It may be in there somewhere. I didn't really find it. But Condoleezza Rice's testimony, I believe it was the Senate testimony, congressional testimony, either way, somewhere in Congress, testifying about the report that was literally, I think the title of the report was either terrorists or Al Qaeda or Bin Laden or something like that, intends to attack inside America using airplanes or something. I'm totally paraphrasing, a bad memory of that, but we'll get to that. Failure of imagination. I have a link to John O'Neill's Wikipedia page. John O'Neill is sort of infamously, there's a Frontline documentary, or special report. It's like an hour. The Man Who Knew. There's an interesting movie that I did see. I think it was called The Looming Towers. Jeff Daniels plays John O'Neill. John O'Neill knew something was going wrong. He retired from the FBI and decided to become a security, head of security. Let me pull this up here. Did I close the page? Super annoying. John O'Neill. That's not helpful. Yeah, okay, there's preparation for you. Anyway, so he became security supervisor, oversight of security of World Trade Center, and he died in the buildings on that day. It's an interesting story. The Looming Buildings movie was quite interesting. And let me just do this. Okay, I paused so you didn't have to listen to me clicking around on some things. Yes, FBI retired, became the head of security for the World Trade Center, at the very least Building 2, where he was when the building collapsed. He was in the building. So head of security, he had some suspicions based on his experience on the ground and so on. It's an interesting story. And then finally, for conspiracy theorists out there, Operation Northwoods, back from 1962, was that's also worth looking into, sort of. Not a rabbit hole you want to spend too much time in, I suppose. But it was sort of you could say it was like a blueprint for use of aircraft, for example, and using aircraft to give the impression, they call them false flag operations, give the impression that there was an attack to stir up public opinion against an enemy or a foe of some sort. Kind of interesting. It kind of it goes to the old history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes quote that I've used somewhere in my various previous episodes of any of my programs. Yes, it doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. So it's interesting, especially in light of the report that Condoleezza Rice makes reference to. It's like a lot of things are written down and nobody reads them, or nobody reads them with intent, perhaps. Anyway, those are the links. Let's get on with the story of 9/11 from Dan Hugo's perspective. I had literally just moved from Silicon Valley back to Phoenix, Arizona. I grew up in Glendale. My parents still live there. I was intent on leaving Silicon Valley after a nice run, my first tour, as I call it, my first tour in Silicon Valley. So I had I began moving in June. I moved out of the house that I was renting. I had been renting it with a college roommate. He had moved to a different house, not too far away, walking distance. So for the summer, I moved the big stuff, and he actually helped me move. So we drove a big truck to Phoenix, and I got a place. What was it? Something like 12 or 13 miles from my parents' house. So it was in a place in Phoenix that had been when I was growing up, when I was in high school, very far away, out in the desert. Why would people even travel out there? Now, of course, it's civilization, as a sprawling city as Phoenix, and it's the metropolitan area is. So I had finished the project I was working on at Leapfrog Toys, Leapfrog Enterprises, whatever it was. And I did the final journey with the minimum stuff, headed to Phoenix. It was something like 3 or 4 weeks prior. So sometime middle of August or so. I was done with Silicon Valley, done with moving, taking it easy, enjoying my new surroundings, just settling in to a post-silly life as a Silicon Valley, Silly Valley. There you go. So I woke up, my usual at the time, I literally had a alarm clock, which is kind of funny to think about now. I had an alarm clock that would start sometime early in the morning playing, usually Howard Stern. I honestly don't remember if the alarm was set for some super early time. I probably had it set for 6 a.m., the usual. And then I would listen to Howard Stern later, or I would wake up to Howard Stern. But I can't imagine I set my alarm for 9 a.m. So I want to say that I was listening to, and as many people who would have listened to Howard Stern at the time may recall, he started in, the towers were struck something around 9, just prior to 9 o'clock. I think it was 8:55 or something. So he was, I think he would run from like 6 a.m. to 10 a.m., I want to say. So anyway, I recall, though, hearing Howard Stern reporting on this total chaos and whatnot. And I was like, what's going on? I turned on the television, probably didn't turn it off again for a month. And yeah, the story begins. The total chaos, the what is going on. Now, I will say the second time I left Silicon Valley, I left after a house fire. I've talked about this before. There's this weird feeling when it's happening and you're like, okay, this is happening. And then I'm not exactly sure why this is happening or the details of what's happening. I know that in my case, it was only me in the home, the neighbors, the surrounding houses and whatnot. You're kind of vaguely aware of what's happening. And this had to have been the case at scale. There was these series of events. We were watching them on television. Some people were in Manhattan. Maybe you were in a building and you could see, maybe you had a view of the World Trade Center and you could watch all of this unfolding above ground level. The world of everyone recording everything and publishing it on a cell phone had not quite arrived yet, but there are certainly a lot of video footage. Very few people recording on film nowadays, but plenty of video to be viewed. And then, of course, all manner of chaos was captured in these ways. So we had not been punched on our own turf in a good long time. The attack on Pearl Harbor is one that's often the comparison. There was at the time, not since Pearl Harbor have we been struck at home kinds of commentary and headlines and so on. Domestic terrorism notwithstanding. So we had the bombing in Oklahoma City at the Mara building, I think it was. The events at Waco, there were other such events. There were other things, but it was always domestic. It was always, it's probably better, maybe worse. Thomas, what was his name? Tim McVeigh and the other guy, I can't remember. You learn their backstories. You see where they grew up and what they were thinking, and they're disillusioned and all this stuff. I'm not diminishing that, but I'm saying that domestic events like that, there's always a backstory that's available. there's something going on currently that's usually can be reported on. So there's just more knowns and a lot of unknowns and plenty of room for conspiracy theories. But here, just kind of people waking up in the morning and boom, literally. The earlier basement van bomb attack on, I don't remember which of the two buildings, but that's an exercise left for the listener. But, the World Trade Center had been attacked with a bomb placed in a substructure, sub-basement parking. And it did some damage, and, the buildings were still standing, and they were a testament to trophies, well-built, classic American construction, built to absorb the impact of a 707 aircraft, I believe, Boeing 707. Of course, nowadays, Boeing aircraft wouldn't be able to make it all the way to the World Trade Center, most likely. But certainly, there was never this notion, a possibility. Now, bombing buildings, I think it was the Mara building, right, in Oklahoma City, that was like not really something people would imagine, but it was shocking. But it was like, oh, okay, yeah, you drive up and you park next to the building with some fertilizer in your van and you blow it up. So not beyond the realm of possibility. Like, wow, that is okay. Yeah, something that could be done. But the notion that 19-ish people learned how to fly airplanes, hijacked 4 different airplanes that were fully fueled and hit buildings and so on. The stuff of movies or Operation Northwoods. In the absence of immediate answers, as is always the case, because the FBI isn't telling us the whole truth. Well, yeah, they're probably investigating. Conspiracy theories began in earnest, and if anybody who was around at the time, you remember seeing pictures, because there were enough cell phones and enough cameras and enough devices to be able to make credible claims that, I was on the roof and I took a picture, a selfie or whatever with the airplane over my shoulder and I could see it coming in, or all manner of cuts and edits and commentary and fictitious and misinformed and disinformed commentary on news clippings, on when someone was on, making claims about who did what, and so on and so on and so on. Pull the Building 7, misreporting that it had already fallen. All kinds of stuff. The makings of it's almost as if they said, what would we need to really fuel the conspiracy theory fires? Make sure we have 10 times as much of all those things. So they just start happening. There were some totally crazy things. I didn't take the time to run down a list and debunk any of them. You can also do that too. There was a passport of one of the terrorists that just floated out of the building and landed on the ground and somebody found it. That kind of stuff always happens. A jet engine from a completely different airplane was found on the ground near one of the towers. I don't know whatever happened to that, but there's these sort of outlandish things that start happening. Somebody said they saw a bunch of people cheering, and then he would later go on to be president somehow. The list goes on. It goes on for miles, and without that immediate sort of authoritative response or a position, I guess, just having authority, get on a microphone, get in front of some cameras and start, here's what happened. Here's what we know. You got to do that every day, or else people say, they're withholding information, because nobody ever gets up and says, okay, today we got nothing. We're still tracking down. But no. So in the absence of that, it's very easy. The internet has only made it easier to gather up some motivated reasoning, find some news clips and some questionable timestamps and so on. This was from 10 years ago. Actually, it was from a different part of the planet last year, etc. I mean, there's a whole list of things. Congressional hearings did not help with some pretty crazy testimony, including, like I said, the Condoleezza Rice stuff. I came away from that thinking these were idiots on our side. Really, really disappointing, I guess would be a word. They called it They called it a failure of the imagination, a failure to conceive of something so crazy, so grand as a 4 aircraft simultaneous hijacking, flying into buildings, requiring the training and all this stuff. Suicide bombers, that's very un-American. I mean, that doesn't enter the consciousness, allegedly. So failure of the imagination, despite some pretty specific reports that were made available by the intelligence gathering capabilities in place at the time. And it has been said over the years that there was not quite the level of intelligence gathering capability on the ground in certain areas, around the Middle East, essentially, Iraq, Afghanistan, other such places, not to mention India and Pakistan, and the list goes on. So did the CIA, the NSA, did they drop the ball? Well, by all indications, not really. Again, there was the report that I could not find. It's probably somewhere. It may be referenced in the 9/11 Commission report. The wording of it was essentially that this is a plan that aircraft could be used or some similar means to attack. And so over the years, it has become clear that it was not a intelligence failure. It wasn't that nobody knew that this was a possibility, John O'Neill perhaps among them, but that it was actually a failure of policy. It was, hey, Mr. President and other parties, Condoleezza Rice, etc., et al., I should say. Here is some information we have. We have some suspicions. Our analysts have done some analyzing, and this seems possible, in the realm of possibility. So not necessarily a failure of imagination on the part of the people reporting, creating. I'm sure there was a national security briefing, the daily briefing. I seem to recall someone reporting an interview or some such that George W. Bush was clearing brush on his, Western White House, whatever they called it, his home in Texas. The president was clearing brush. He received his briefing, perhaps at that time, and it was something to the effect that, there's some stuff going on with some people that we gave money to back in the days when the Soviet Union was trying to invade Afghanistan, and we were backing the rebel forces and all this stuff, all this story that starts to unfold over the years. And a policy was not put in place to effectively counter that, and that's what it is. So there will always be conspiracy theories around some of that and the events that followed, and just say the word Halliburton, and now that Cheney is back in the news this week, no one could possibly forget how much money Halliburton made from starting and running a war in Iraq, because why not? So either way, the failure to take effective action based on the available information was something not emphasized, because why would you want to bring that up when you can bring up anything but? I almost wonder if some conspiracy theories are allowed to fester, I guess you could say, because it takes the attention off of the actual questions that should be asked. There's a crowd of scientists out there that, stop me if you've heard this one recently. It should amaze anyone just how many latent experts we have in the public. The public sphere is full of people who, without any formal academic training or any real research, are metallurgists, structural engineers, chemists, radio engineers, physicists, and the list goes on. Some are actually experts. There are a certain fraction of actual metallurgists or actual structural engineers who will comment. Most are merely bored, and they have access to the internet. So and even with the experts, I think what ends up happening is you get snapshots of information from the internet, possibly not pristine, completely factual. You may be getting some interpretation. Are you getting the data or the information, or the mis or disinformation? If you are a particular subject matter expert, ideally you're getting enough raw data that you can derive your own information from it and reach some conclusion. But if conclusions are based on, I heard it on the internet, if you have just enough subject matter expertise to be dangerous, you might say, I'm an architect, and I will tell you that the building should not have been able to free fall and all that. And some of those questions are still very interesting, and I'm not sure if the answers are always satisfactory, but I will say, There have been some very convincing, and I would say basically conclusive assessments of the behavior of the steel supports, the cross beams, that did not need to melt. Steel melts at 4,500 degrees Fahrenheit, I think it is, or some super hot temperatures that are far above where a kerosene fire would have been, temperature-wise. But what happens when steel doesn't need to melt, but it can simply start to become bendable? When steel starts to lose its rigidity properties and becomes malleable, that's how you work steel, by the way. You don't need to burn the steel so it melts away. You heat it up, you shape it, you hammer on it. You're applying it's called a TTT diagram. You can look at the time temperature transformation of different steels, or different the crystal structures and so on of different of alloys and whatnot. So you can take a steel support structure and you can apply a temperature change to it that's slow, a slow temperature change, as opposed to a super high temperature. Briefly work the steel, quench it, like horseshoes. A nice blacksmith making that shoe fit. So a lot of things can happen to steel supports when they are heating to a sufficient temperature to allow for their properties to change, and that's totally possible. I don't have any of the samples of materials, and I'm not a metallurgist, so I can't say that I'd be an expert witness on any of this, but there's enough information in my background to say, oh, okay, you don't need to melt the steel, but you can change its properties. And that's one of the things that enters into the public's fear of conspiracy discussion. It wasn't hot enough to melt, therefore it must have been charges placed to demolish the buildings. And there's all sorts of interpretations that have expert opinion or assessments, and then there's no, that's not what happened, I know better. And you can make convincing cases for either, and that was sort of an interesting experience to happen. I wasn't around for the assassination of John F. Kennedy in Dallas in 1963, so I have to imagine that this was sort of similar, but with so many more avenues of disseminating theories, good and bad. So it was definitely an interesting experience to watch unfold. I initially had some doubts because you're just getting inundated with maybe people with good intentions, a little bit of paranoia, and access to the internet is not always healthy. And maybe some people were actually applying disinformation techniques to give a completely misdirected, false narrative. It's hard to say. And we could all spend tremendous amounts of time that we don't have trying to figure that out. The problems are many with motivated reasoning. This is where you pick facts that match your notion, your conception, your preconceived notions, perhaps. If you have motivated reasoning driving your search for supporting evidence, the search for truth, if you have an incomplete understanding of the subject matter at hand, if the data available from sources that are suffering from motivated reasoning, whether natural or planned, right? I could pick out some facts to craft a narrative that matches my political agenda, and I could disseminate that on YouTube, and you could use that as evidence for your own theories, and there you go. It is profoundly difficult to reach a useful point of discussion if you do not know what you're talking about, and if what you are talking about is incorrect, either by accident or by good faith but bad interpretation. Right? You really wanted to learn, you want to figure out what's going on, versus I am going to misinform, I'm going to steer people in the wrong direction. And you have a whole sea of that mixed in with people who are like, but I do know what I'm talking about, I just have really bad data. So this has all become par for the course. So if there's one thing we can all learn from 9/11, from September 11th, 2001, is something we can apply to the pandemic, the COVID pandemic of 2020, COVID-19, so technically 2019. The aftermath of the conspiracy theories and the controversy over reporting findings. The Patriot Act was put in place to essentially spy on people domestically. Various other government actions and programs pointed inside our country, compromising personal privacy, paranoia. There were references to a return to McCarthyism, right? But pointing fingers not necessarily at communists, but as potential terrorists. There have been enough domestic terror incidents in the ensuing years to kind of calmly but still persistently stoke that flame. These have all led to a decrease in the trust of federal government, to be sure, and government agencies and three-letter agencies and so on. But if you look at some of the legislation that was completely reactionary, the Patriot Act is infamously awful. Some aspects of it, or maybe even all of it at this point, are still in place because nobody, it actually, this literally just occurred to me, but it's honestly, when you, in the world of software development, you have something called a code smell. Literally, it's, what is that? That's horrible. Did somebody leave a wet towel in your code for 10 years? Your code is stinky. Well, if you create these reactionary laws, right? You write the Patriot Act because, we really need to find out. We need the tools. You'll hear that a lot. We need the tools to conduct investigations. Law enforcement needs tools to do their job. So you write this sweeping, privacy destroying Patriot Act, and then it's in place, and it's in place for a while, and then nobody wants to edit it. They don't want, if we change it, what will that do? What's the impact of it? Everything seems, we haven't had a terrorist attack in a while. I guess we can just, we'll just extend it, or Patriot Act, Patriot 2 maybe. I don't know if there was a sequel. It just faded into the background. It's just become this sort of understood notion, just encrypt, end-to-end encryption. If anything, it has driven, which we were doing at Netscape. We were trying to get people to use SMIME, secure multi-part internet mail extensions, to encrypt your conversations, use SSL and now TLS to encrypt your internet traffic in general. The notion of privacy and security are more in the public consciousness. Edward Snowden, you may love him or hate him, but the fact is we are now able to see just why you should treat the communications that you want to have private as though people are literally listening in on you. People can often make an argument that, who cares what I'm saying? Yeah, no, now you know. So decreased trust in government. They're not telling us everything, and they put these crazy laws in place to limit our freedoms and, constitutionality, and people wonder why is the federal government signing off on this stuff, and then they don't want to change it. Code smells, right? We don't know how it works. It's working. We don't want to break anything. We don't want to cause trouble, so we'll just keep it in place and renew it and keep funding it. We don't know what else to do. So that's nothing new, really. The always increasing availability of platformed misinformation, that is, take information that is dubious and make it available to everyone. We have the channels, we have the tools, and so on. Disinformation and misinformation. Misinformation is wrong. Disinformation is wrong on purpose. Can really stir up all these fallacies at scale. So you get the availability, you get the confirmation, you get the motivated reasoning, the list goes on. And there was a selection bias, of course, and there is simply no stopping these. You can put in place, you can't use the C word for what, nowadays people just say COVID, but there was a time you were, if you said the word COVID, your channel might be taken away from you on YouTube, or people would remove your posts, or, so on and so on. So a lot of censorship outright, although on private platforms it's very different from commercial, and that's something that's been lost on people, that you don't have a freedom of speech on every single platform that is owned by people. It's a government thing, not a private industry thing. But still, it's very uncomfortable to know that you are being censored in any way, whether you take it as a legal matter or just ethical. I thought I could say what I wanted to say. Well, as long as you don't use these the reserved words. George Carlin made a minor comeback for the 7 words you can't say, and that list always gets bigger. Even the subject matter experts, who were initially maybe, best intentions, they're platformed, they have access to tons and tons of data on the internet. It may not be so easy to get raw data from, primary sources. So you can look at video clips on YouTube and you start saying, hey, I'm a structural engineer and building 7 did this and that. And you're like, well, you're looking at video from YouTube channels that may have an agenda. They may have edited video together, or maybe not. It's hard to say. But even subject matter experts can go off the rails, which we started to see back then, post 9/11, and recently post pandemic. And they're still going on today about vaccines, and vaccines are supposed to have sterilizing immunity. Well, not really. If you listen to subject matter experts who kind of keep a level head and they actually talk about the science and they keep the politics out and they keep the conspiracy theories out, it was pretty interesting to see in both cases, really, when you think about it, the mechanics of taking out a building or two, how vaccines can be developed with an existing platform, the mRNA envelope, the lipid envelope in which to transport an mRNA-based vaccine had been in development for years prior to the pandemic. It didn't just get whipped up out of nowhere, but that's a much more exciting narrative to present. The use of scientific data versus anecdotal data to prove or disprove things. So it has been interesting to see how history can repeat itself, even if only by rhyming. Right? Clearly, the pandemic did not take out any buildings, but it definitely rhymed. End of the day, stirring up the brain chemicals, the adrenaline, the dopamine, the other stuff. I think there's 4 main ones, right? Adrenaline, dopamine. What's the other one? Of course, I'm totally spacing on it. Maybe I need some caffeine to get that going. But it's very exciting to think that, I figured out 9/11 because I watched Joe Rogan, who was not on the air at the time. But you get my point, that you can be on the inside. You can know what's going on because you're hearing from, fill in the blank. The astrophysicist knows how structural engineering works. Okay, interesting. We saw that again in 2020, of course. So 9/11, 2020, pandemic. You can pick any topic now. Everybody's an expert. They're happy to make monetizable content out of it and get the following, and the crank continues to turn on the machine that prints money. With so many limitations on who is allowed to utter which words in social media, including on YouTube videos, of course, it becomes really weird to coin a phrase. Like underground resistance. Like you have to use code words to communicate so you can continue to monetize your videos. Just an interesting time. Something to learn from. So memories. I will end with some memories. When this event took place and the days and weeks that followed, so 9/11, 9/12, 9/13, many discussions, reflections were had. My family is from New Jersey, an extended family from that area, from New York. We call it back east. So there was a lot to reflect on, a lot of, remember when, this whole area. I was, when was the last time I was in Battery Park? Strangely, it would not be until a visit to Manhattan. So I'd grown up in New Jersey. We moved to Arizona when I was 6 years old, 1977. I had been back to New York a few times. It would not be until a visit to Manhattan in 1995. I wrote 96. It was Christmas and New Year's. It was right after Christmas and until a few days. So I guess we were there for just over a week, probably like 10 days. Somewhere I have an itinerary I could probably pull up. But my college roommate and I, different college roommate from the one I lived with in Silicon Valley, visited Manhattan. And so December 95, the government was shut down. So we visited the World Trade Center on one of the days. The government had shut down in December up until, I think it was January 6th, to 1996. So it was like mid-December until the end, beginning of January. So we were there somewhere in the middle of that. Among the impacts that we felt, we could not visit Ellis Island. So there, let's go visit the Statue of, no, can't, sorry. So we made it down to Battery Park. Can't go across to the island there. So, cause it's a federal, it's a national park. So federal government would fund the park being open and the ferry. I think we probably could have taken a ferry out there and at least taken pictures, but the ferries weren't running because why bother, right? So we're at Battery Park, which is right there, and the World Trade Center is literally just north of us. So we walked to the World Trade Center. We got some tickets to go up to the what is it? The View of the World, the restaurant at the top of the world, whatever it was. We rode up the elevator. We got to the restaurant. We're taking pictures. We're having a lunch or something. And we were like, well, we can't do a few things because the government shut down. Why don't we just stay here until it's at night and we can take some pictures of the nighttime Manhattan skyline? And we found out you could go to the roof. You could actually go to the roof of the World Trade Center. So we did. So it's dark. It's after night. It's after dark. It's nighttime. The sky is dark. I want to say it was probably 7, 8, 9 p.m. that we ended up sticking around that late. Went up to the roof. I'm going to say that the guy was probably reasonably close, but maybe a little bit. Maybe it wasn't quite this bad, but there was some good wind. I had gloves on. Did not have a cell phone, much less a cell phone camera. So I had a classic point and shoot camera. Probably, I don't even remember if the photos came out at all because you can't really control for the super low light of a nighttime shot of the skyline of Manhattan. But I'll tell you this: I would take my gloves off, take my camera out of my pocket, and by the time that few seconds of action was completed, my hands were already freezing. It was difficult to hold the camera, much less point it and aim and so on. So the person that was kind of running the door to get on the roof, we basically go up there, take a picture, put the gloves back on, and go back into this little hallway. So we were talking to the guy while we warm back up, and he says, it's probably like 50 degrees below zero with the wind chill. Maybe correct, but it certainly felt that way. So very cold, but also, one of those memories that will probably not be so easy to recreate anytime soon. So we spent the whole day, half a day, several, many hours from midday until after dark, checking out the skyline from the very top of the world on World Trade. It's the one without the antenna. So you check on which of the two buildings that was. And then we went back down to ground level and we probably went to a late dinner. I want to say we may have gone to, it was like Hard Rock Cafe, but the celebrity thing, not Planet, was it Planet Hollywood? Might have been Planet. No, anyway, we went to some goofball restaurant rather than properly enjoying the full ethnic range, which we did do on other days. We went to some really cool spots. But either way, it was a long day and it was very interesting, freezing, but still certainly a memory. We got on the phone at some point, my former roommate and I, flipping through the photo album because we were both taking lots of pictures during our whole visit, reflecting on those times. It was, of course, amazing to move forward in time today over the last 23 years and interact with younger people who were not around at that time. I'm going to guess that people who are around, who are alive for the Pearl Harbor attacks in 1941 and for other, life-changing, world-changing events, people who were around for November 1963 and for the other assassinations that would follow with Martin Luther King Jr., RFK, Robert Kennedy, father of RFK Jr., who himself has gone off the rails a little bit. So these are all the scope and grandeur of events like this are so outlandish. The fact that so many people have a synchronizing event of this scale, it usually has to be something negative, right? Like there's never like a national, hey, we cured cancer. Everybody, let's go celebrate. So it's usually, the closest you're going to get to a good news event is, Barack Obama, President Obama at the time, announcing that he had killed bin Laden. Well, he told some people to do it. But yeah, it's usually some negative event, terrorism, natural disaster, et cetera, that becomes a part of a common, if you were going to look at a tree at the rings of a tree, or the striations in a cross section of some geology, right? You've got the Grand Canyon, or anywhere where you can see millennia of development with bands of thick and bands of thin and different types of chemicals and deposits. And this is where the meteor hit the Yucatan Peninsula, and so you have a layer of dust that forms within a striation in the rock structure. So these kinds of big events that leave those sorts of marks are kind of interesting, and it's interesting to see how people manage the misinformation, the disinformation, the fire hose of who knows what's going on. I'm going to go with this theory. I'm going to believe that. The pandemic, of course, is the most recent one. Like I said, you can look at the events of 9/11 through the lens of the pandemic when it comes to mis and disinformation, people becoming experts overnight. Like, I didn't know you were a virologist and an epidemiologist all in one person, and you never went a day in any sort of higher educational institution. Amazing. So yeah, very interesting. And it's interesting to see how these sorts of events have lasting impacts on the attitudes, expectations, and optimisms and general optimism for the future in the people around us. So let's see what happens in 23 more years. 23 is not a magic number, but people are too quick to want to celebrate power. What is it? Numbers that 5 are a factor of. So what is that? That would be, I'm forgetting the term. Powers of 5? No. Anyway, numbers that end in 0 or 5. How about that? So 23 years, this September 11, 2024. A look back, some memories, some reflections, a little bit of conspiracy theory. Yeah. Let's see what comes next. Thank you for listening, of course. Don't forget to check out buymeacoffee.com/DanHugo and Ko-fi.com, ko-fi.com/DanHugo. Find out where to find all of the other programming and projects and whatnot. And I promise I will use them more as more interesting things are happening. There's a ton of stuff going on. It just doesn't make itself apparent. I don't mean a parent. I mean a parent so that you can actually see it. I need a PR agent or someone who can tell my story for me while I'm trying to get this stuff done. Either way, though, check those out. And in the meantime, we'll catch you for some other episode of some other production every week. Take care.